Welcome to True Hauntings YouTube edition, where we bring you all the juicy bits of what we've discovered during our podcast, which you can find on Spotify and iTunes, or just search True Hauntings, your favourite podcast show. So I'm Anne.
And I'm Renata.
And today we're going to be looking at the Amityville horror.
So what really happened to the Lutz family at the house where Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered his entire family? And we found some really interesting facts. Things that I didn't know.
Pigs and psychic pajama parties, possession, a secret red room that smells of blood and rotten eggs, and greed and fame, all rolled into the one episode. It all started before the Lutz family, didn't it?
Yep. It all started back with the DeFeos, who actually purchased the house in the first place and lived there quite happily for a number of years before all hell broke loose.
Now, they were quite a religious family. They had religious artefacts everywhere throughout the house. And DeFeo Sr.
Ronald
was a bit of a brutal man, a bit rough on the family, allegedly.
And it seemed that the youngest, Ronald DeFeo Jr., was the one that copped it all.
Yeah.
So I think Ron Sr. had big plans for him and wanted him to follow in
the family business.
But that was not what was going to happen, and Ronald Jr. became a real rebel. Yeah,
he became violent. There was drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and he actually started to become quite abusive towards the family, and there was one stage that he rebelled against the father and threatened to kill him and pull a shotgun on him. So there were issues even before the murder even happened. And there's a lot of mystery around the actual murders as well, because they say that possibly that Ronald Jr.'s
sister had something to do with it,
and there may have been a little bit of a liaison allegedly between that pair.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who knows?
I don't know.
I know. It's hard for people to stand up for themselves after the fact. And
The night, though, the night it happened was November the 3rd, 1974, and 24-year-old Ronald DeFeo shot the other 6 members of the family.
Now, he had been watching TV that night and watching some sort of war movie, and he had been drinking drugs, and so it's thought that he's come to in a bit of a start, and he saw a black figure who told him to kill the family and handed him the rifle. But we also found some evidence reports that suggested that maybe the sister had something to do with that, but you can listen to that in the podcast.
Now, the thing also was that the whole murder took place in 15 minutes and they were all face down on the bed. So something had to go on prior to this happening.
And there was no drugs in their system that they found. So how did that even happen? Now, when Ronnie Jr. went to court, a priest actually said that when he was being cross-examined that he looked like he was possessed. Now, that's really important because that ended up being used in defence, the trial defence. So we think that's where the idea of the whole possession started back then. And he really wasn't liked in the town. The townspeople didn't like him at all.
But after that, the house became vacant and it stayed vacant for about 13 months. And then the Lutz family moved in.
Yes, with their children. Now, it was a blended family. They, contrary to popular belief, they actually had a successful business and weren't hard up on their luck.
This was not about the money for them.
So they scored the house for $88,000. But you would think it would have to play on their mind, and particularly the children moving into that house. They would have to know about the murders.
At school, you can just imagine what they would have copped.
They would have been tortured.
They lasted 28 days in that house before they had to move. The thing was, when they did move, they were going to come back. They moved, I think, because they were just hassled out of the place by the rest of the township.
I reckon that they moved out because they were scared, and I don't think the phenomena was anywhere near as bad as what It has since been reported, but knowing they were in a house that had people that had been murdered, every little noise and creak would have been distressing. You know what it's like when we do private cases. Every little noise becomes demonic. And when they first fled the house, they supposedly couldn't even find the family, but there was one plucky little reporter who was only 19-year-old starting out, Laura DeFeo, and she found George at work. So it wasn't that hard to find George.
No.
And she sat down and had a really good interview and got the story out of them, what had happened.
Yeah, and George to this day, he has passed now, has always said that he believed 100% that everything that they saw and heard in the house was absolutely true.
But in saying that, they did get together with the lawyer, William Webber, at one stage over several bottles of wine and concoct a more creative story about what went down in the house. And then they were going to turn the house into a tourist attraction. So when George met with Laura, he did declare that and say, look, this happened, there are recordings of it, you need to know that we did discuss doing this.
The paranormal investigators that came in and...
You know, there was actually the very first one that was meant to come in was Hans Holzer. He was the first one invited, but he was unavailable. So they went to the second person on the list, which were the Warrens, Lorraine and Ed Warren, and they weren't even known then.
Yeah, they were also part of a paranormal group, a seance group. So they didn't go in on their own. There were other people in there with them, and they had what they called a psychic pajama party.
So they walked around from room to room going, oh, I feel this here, oh, I feel that there. And the thing is, and this is what frustrates me as a paranormal investigator, it wasn't based on facts, it was based on their psychic impressions.
Yeah, a lot of beliefs, a lot of...
there is a lot of personal belief and bias.
Religious bias there too. Yeah. So it's really interesting how we pull this apart in our podcast episode because we really dig into some of the things behind the story that most people know and find within the books and the movies that they read. Remember, books and movies really take everything to the nth degree.
Yeah. So there was so many things that actually were reported to happen within this house. Now, one of the first ones was they got a priest in to bless it because of the murders that had happened. How would you feel about the priest coming in to bless your house, Renata?
Well, you know what we think about exorcisms and ghosts, and how we have found out the more work we do, how exorcisms don't really suit the whole getting rid of the ghost thing. They just don't like it.
This poor old priest has come into the room to bless the house. Apparently he's gone into one room where there were flies, lots and lots of flies. Of course
they have to be flies.
And he then heard a voice go, "Get out." And so he got out.
What about Jody the pig?
Oh, Jody the pig, yes. So this scared the shit out of me in the movie theatres. I have to say, this was one of the first movies I ever saw in the cinema that scared the shit out of me. There is Jody the pig whose, I think it was red eyes used to peer in the window and just glare through at one of the children, and that was her friend, Jody the pig.
Yep. The Lutzes would wake up.
Well, it was George particularly, I think.
They would wake up, or he would wake up every morning at 3:15 a.m, which was allegedly the time the original murders took place.
And he would hear doors slamming. He heard a marching band. A marching band. I don't even know what that would have had to do with the original haunting, but they only lasted 28 days in the house. That's not a long time for a family to settle in and get used to the actual natural sounds of your house.
Yeah, I still think they were pushed out by everything that was happening within the community.
Yeah. I don't think it had anything to do with financial issues.
No.
So there were so many people that had their fingers in the pie to make money out of the Amityville legend. There was the lawyer, there was this Dr. Kaplan. You can find out in the podcast about all these. Jay Anson, who wrote the book, who openly said he was going to make it far more interesting than the facts.
He was going to live out of the story.
Yes, and he was going to have truckloads of cashmere sweaters, I believe believe is one of the quotes that we had.
Yep.
There was also Ronnie DeFeo, who was going to use all of this as his excuse for murdering his family. And then the Warrens themselves, this was their moment to claim their fame.
16 movies have been made out of this one incident.
Several books.
And I think the story will not be going away. So do you want to find out more?
Do you want to find out if it's a true haunting?
Do you want to find out the real story behind the Amityville Horror House?
So join us on the True Hauntings podcast to find out the details.